Hello, everyone. My name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I call this episode Healed by Lightning 30 True Cases and the Connection to UFO Healings. This may sound very unusual, but it's absolutely true. A lot of people have been healed as a result of being struck by lightning. And there are some very interesting similarities to people who have been healed as a result of a UFO encounter. So that's what I want to talk about today. I've got more than 30 cases, first-hand cases, of people who have experienced this. I will say this is quite unusual. Lightning is actually very dangerous and kills many people each year, but there are these few cases in which people have actually been healed. It's really quite striking, very unusual, and that's what I want to talk about today. Probably the expert in these kinds of cases, the first person to really look into it, is a professor. His name is Panos T. Pappas, PhD, and he is a professor of physics and mathematics at the Technological Educational Institute in Athens, Greece. He's definitely one of the world's leading researchers into healings by lightning and compiled many true life cases. I've found many more. They reach back hundreds of years and are continuing to the current day. Let's just get started because there are so many cases. The earliest case I could find occurred in 1776 to Miss Wynne of Dublin, Ireland. Miss Wynne was suffering from a large tumor in her left breast and was facing surgery to have it removed. And this is when something miraculous happened. While she was on her way home, one day she was struck by lightning. It went right through her body, knocking her unconscious. And when she woke up, she was fine. But she did go to the doctor. And when he examined her tumor, he got a big surprise. Her tumor, which had been really hard, was now soft and appeared to be shrinking. And in fact, over a period of 2 weeks, it shrank completely and disappeared. Her doctor, Dr. Georgius Hicks, was so impressed by this that he decided to do some experiments. And he says that he was able to cure 2 other women of tumors by using electrical stimulation on their tumors. So this was the earliest case I could find, but there are many, many more. I'll just go through them chronologically. The next case I could find occurred in 1806 to a gentleman by the name of Samuel Leffers in North Carolina. He's a very prominent man in his community. And a few months before this, in 1806, he had suffered a severe stroke. This left him disabled. He was partially paralyzed, suffered from numbness, vision loss, and difficulty in speaking. And it was a few months later, he was struck by lightning. It was a pretty severe strike. He was in his house. It did quite a bit of damage. It knocked him out. But when he woke up, he first discovered that he no longer needed glasses to see. And not only that, he was no longer paralyzed. And another weird result was that his skin tone improved dramatically. His wrinkles went away, and his skin tone became very smooth. He was quite elderly at the time, so this was a very interesting result. Another very interesting case occurred just a few years later in 1822. This was reported in the American Journal of Science. The witness involved was named Martin Rockwell of Connecticut. And he was 10 feet away from a lightning strike and felt only a brief paralysis and a numbness that lasted for about an hour. He said he also felt a burning in his chest. At the time, he suffered from pretty severe asthma, but following this lightning strike, his asthma cleared up and never returned again. So here we have lightning curing all kinds of illnesses. Here's another very interesting case which occurred on April 16, 1828, aboard a ship called the New York. This ship was sailing towards Liverpool, England, carrying a full complement of passengers, and it was struck by lightning on the morning of April 19th. And this was a very severe lightning strike. It shattered the main mast. It demolished the walls of the storeroom, removed several planks from the hull. Doors and partitions were thrown open. A large mirror in a cabin was shattered into small fragments. Many parts of the ship were damaged. It actually sprung a leak. None of the passengers were injured, thankfully, but one passenger was apparently healed. This passenger was suffering from paralysis. He was an elderly gentleman who was paralyzed for about 5 years and partially paralyzed and was only able to walk about a half mile at a time before being overcome with weakness. Well, this lightning strike came right near him. He jumped up and ran, and apparently this cured him. Following this lightning strike, he no longer suffered from this partial paralysis. There were some other interesting results of this lightning strike. Every instrument on the ship that was made of steel, including the carpenter's tools, all the knives and forks, and anything made of soft iron, even the nails in every part of the ship, all of them had been rendered permanently magnetic. So this is a very interesting effect from lightning. Another case, 1846, involved an African American slave, a woman who was quite elderly. She was 70 years old. She was struck by lightning. And even though she had gone through menopause some 20 years earlier, following this lightning strike, she began having her period again. She began menstruating and did so for the next 3 years. So I don't know what's going on here, but it's having really profound effect on people's bodies. And many of these cases are very well verified. Another case comes from the very respected Lancet Medical Journal and talks about a gentleman named Reuben. He is a farmer from Yorkshire, England. This occurred around 1850, and the farmer was suffering from cancer on his chin and lower lip. One day he was out plowing a field with his 2 horses, and they were all struck by lightning. His 2 horses were killed, but Reuben not only survived, his cancer went into sudden and complete remission. The senior surgeon at the Lloyd Cottage Hospital, where Reuben was being treated, wrote, and I quote, "What seems to be the most astonishing feature in this case is the healing process which was set up in the lip and chin soon after the accident. The cancer gradually lessened, and in a few weeks every trace of the diseased structure disappeared, and for 10 years he enjoyed complete freedom from his former suffering and signs of the disease." So yeah, cured of cancer by a lightning strike. Another amazing case occurred in 1891 to a German man who was paralyzed in both his feet. His caretakers had actually taken him outside for a bath and forgot about him. A lightning storm rolled in. There was a huge lightning strike, and this is when his caretakers realized that they had left this poor man outside. They were going to go run out to find him, but in he walked of his own volition. He had been cured of his paralysis in both his feet. This caused quite a stir in the medical community at the time. And it was 1 year later that there was another remarkable case, this one in New York, as reported by the New York Times. It occurred on June 10th, 1892, to a hotel keeper by the name of Newton Worst. He had been deaf for many years. He was actually right next to a tree that got struck by lightning. He was stunned by the lightning strike, but when he recovered, he was very happy because his deafness was gone. His hearing had been completely restored. And it's not the only case. This also extends to animals. A very interesting case occurred in 1896. A hog farmer by the name of Mr. Graff in Kokomo, Indiana, was transporting a load of pig carcasses, dead pigs who were all victims of cholera. His wagon was struck by lightning, and this actually caused one of the carcasses, one of the pigs, to become reanimated. This pig actually ran from the wagon. The farmer chased it down and captured it, and this pig showed no signs of cholera and appeared to be completely healthy. So yeah, that sounds very Frankenstein-esque, but this is what the report says, and it's not unique. And in fact, it was just 5 years later, in 1901, when a very similar case occurred, also involving pigs. This case occurred in Tupai, China. Again, a pig farmer was dealing with a litter of 11 pigs, each of whom was suffering from paralysis in their hind legs. And then their sty was struck by lightning. All of the little baby piglets were knocked unconscious, but upon awakening, their hind legs moved normally. So yeah, this extends to animals as well. Another amazing case occurred on July 23rd, 1897, as reported by the New York Times. A policeman by the name of Schroep in Washington, New Jersey, was on the beat, patrolling the area. At the time, he was suffering from rheumatism and indigestion, which he'd had for a couple of months. Suddenly, there was a strike of lightning right near him. He fell to the ground. His uniform was pretty much torn off of his body. His brass buttons on his uniform were melted. His billy club was shattered to bits. But the good news was his rheumatism and his indigestion was gone. Moving along, in 1899, Eli Forbes, who had lost the use of his left arm due to rheumatism, was struck by lightning. As soon as this lightning struck him, his left arm straightened out, and he felt a surge of strength pulse through him. Following the lightning strike, he was now able to use his arm normally, and his rheumatism was gone. And another case involving a cure for rheumatism occurred just a few years later in July of 1902. This was reported in the Boston Globe and the Minneapolis Journal. The gentleman, his name was Jonathan W. James of Queens River, Rhode Island. And he was struck by lightning, and it completely cured him of his rheumatism. Many, many cases. 3 years later, in 1905, a New York socialite by the name of Miss Warren Williams was close to death with typhoid fever and blood poisoning. She was lying in her bedroom when lightning struck and actually set the bedroom on fire. Her husband ran in and pulled her out of the room and carried her to her neighbor's house. He called the doctor, fearing the worst, but according to her physician, Dr. Kaufman, not only was Miss Williams fine, she no longer suffered from typhoid fever. So she was cured, absolutely cured. The doctor was asked about how this could have happened, and his reply was that, quote, the flash of lightning which filled the room had some strange effect. So there's clearly something going on here that we don't fully understand. And there are more modern cases. In 1907, a 13-year-old girl in Salem, Massachusetts, was suffering from epilepsy. She was struck by lightning, and following this lightning strike, she no longer had any more epileptic fits. It cured her. 1 year later, James Gorsuch of New York was struck by lightning. At the time, he was partially blind and deaf due to a bout with scarlet fever in his childhood. He's now an adult, so he'd suffered from partial blindness and deafness for years. But during an electrical storm, he felt really strong electrical sensations. And this restored first his hearing, and over the next few days, his vision was also restored. So, this is amazing what is happening here. Here's a case which occurred in 1908. This occurred to Walter Keene of New Jersey, who suffered from rheumatism. It was bad enough that he had to walk with a cane until he was struck by lightning. He says this lightning strike actually nearly killed him, but afterwards he was healed of his rheumatism. Unfortunately, this was a temporary cure, and after about 3 months, his rheumatism started to come back. 1 year later, in 1909, Mr. Beasley of Melbourne, Australia, was struck by lightning. At the time, he was suffering from rheumatic gout and could walk only with difficulty. He had to use a cane. He was struck by lightning, and his health returned to normal. Really amazed not only him, but all the people who knew him witnessed this. And there's many other cases. Most of the cases are, in fact, modern cases. On July 15th, 1911, Miss Jane Decker, who was 65 years old and profoundly deaf since childhood, was struck by lightning while in her home in Connecticut. This strike left her sore and bedridden for several days, but incredibly, it also restored her ability to hear. As was reported in the New York Times, her hearing is now so good that she is able to carry on a conversation in an ordinary tone of voice. And if you don't believe that case, there's always another case right after it. That same year in Fargo, North Dakota, a medical doctor by the name of C.H. Geary was struck by lightning in his home. At the time, he suffered from paralysis, but immediately following the strike, the movement of his limbs was restored, and he quickly improved to completely normal health. Here's a case from New Orleans in Louisiana. This occurred in 1911 to a young girl named Jessie Fischel. She suffered from an illness which caused her to lose her ability to speak. And her family took her to a series of doctors, 17 different doctors, in fact, none of whom were able to help her. The family was praying for some kind of miracle, and this is when lightning struck, literally, and it frightened the girl so badly that she miraculously recovered her ability to speak. Also in 1912, October 18th, 1912, a man from Chicago was struck by lightning, and it cured him of his rheumatism, but just for 24 hours. So apparently it was a temporary cure. And as the article said, the method may be all right, but the difficulty of making it practical comes in securing your bolts on schedule. In 1912, Polly Harper of Harpersville, New York, was sitting in a chair in her backyard when a bolt of lightning struck nearby, knocking her unconscious. She was unconscious for several hours and finally woke up. But at the time of the lightning strike, she was bound to a wheelchair with chronic rheumatism. And when she woke up, her rheumatism was gone. She was now healthy. Sometimes lightning not actually cures a person, but makes them stronger. There are two such cases which occurred in 1912. One occurred to a telegraph employee who was suffering from delicate health, and he was a victim of lightning strike, and after being struck by lightning and recovering from it, he says he became much more healthy, robust, and strong. And the same thing happened to another gentleman by the name of Mr. Rold. He was also suffering from weak health, was struck by lightning, and afterwards became much stronger. And we've seen cases where animals have been healed. Well, this actually occurs to plant life as well. There's a very interesting case in which a poplar tree was struck by lightning, and following being struck by lightning, this particular poplar tree started to grow at a much more vigorous rate and actually outpaced all the other identical poplar trees around it. It became much taller and larger than all its surrounding trees. So apparently, lightning can actually have an effect on plant life as well. Another case, August 24th, 1915, Mrs. Charles A. Burdick of Berlin, Connecticut, was struck by lightning in her home. It was a pretty severe lightning strike. It knocked her down and destroyed her house pretty bad, caused about $1,000 worth of damage, and destroyed articles in all 8 rooms of her house. But the most amazing thing was the cure she experienced. At the time, she suffered from rheumatism, but following this lightning strike, her rheumatism disappeared. She was cured. A lot of cases of people cured of rheumatism. In 1916, Mr. H.F. Riley of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, was struck by lightning. It actually threw him out of his chair, and upon awakening, he realized he no longer felt any pain. He had been suffering from rheumatism for about 5 years, but following this lightning strike, his rheumatism was gone. Another case involved actually 2 people. This occurred in April 1921 in the Edmonton area of London, England. A thunderstorm struck. It was very severe. It actually blew out the windows of several homes, and a mother and her 2 boys suffered a near lightning strike and were actually burned pretty severely by it. But what was most amazing is her 2 young boys were deaf, but following this lightning strike, their hearing was restored. So it actually cured 2 people in one strike. This is just really quite miraculous. In 1925, Miss John Deviney of Beverly, Pennsylvania, had lost the use of her arm. And she was sitting out on her veranda and was struck by lightning. And this restored her arm. It was no longer paralyzed, and she enjoyed good health. Also, that same year, 1925, a 67-year-old gentleman by the name of Noah W. Myers, also suffered from paralysis of his left arm. And he was out camping in Bakersfield, California, near his home. And he was inside his tent and holding a metal cooking utensil when he was struck by lightning on his arm. And the lightning hit the metal cooking utensil and went right through the utensil and struck Myers. It burned a spot about 6 inches diameter under his left arm. He went to see a doctor, and the physician declared that the patient would be just fine. But most amazing is that Noah Myers was able now to use his left arm again. It was no longer paralyzed. Many cases. Here's a very famous case which occurred in June of 1932 to a gentleman by the name of Thomas Young. He was a farmer from Duketon, Tennessee, and he was suffering from cancer of the mouth, and he was expected to die from it. He was very near death. It had spread through his body, and he was reclining in a hammock when one of the trees that the hammock was tied to was struck by lightning. And Thomas felt this bolt of lightning travel right through him. It actually ripped the shoes right off of his body. But in the days that followed, the cancer, which had spread throughout his body, completely disappeared. Something very profound is happening here. And there's so many cases, I think they really deserve more attention than they're getting. A lot of people don't know about this. It's another very famous case occurred in 1934 to a little 4-year-old girl by the name of Muriel Fernley. She was blind from birth, and she was sitting on the couch of her home in London, England, when lightning struck nearby, causing her to lose consciousness. She woke up the next morning, and everyone was shocked, including her, because she could see for the first time in her life. Only a few weeks earlier, she had been examined by doctors for her condition, and they had pronounced her condition absolutely incurable. And then she was struck by lightning, and she could see, healed of profound blindness. Rheumatism does seem to be the most popular cure by lightning, and here's another case which occurred in Willow Springs, Illinois, to a gentleman by the name of John Latz. This occurred in 1934. John Latz was suffering from rheumatism, and then he was struck by lightning and cured. And as he says, "I am a humanitarian and would not conceal this discovery for financial purposes, so I gladly make it public." Here's another amazing case. In March of 1936, a lady by the name of Adeline Slover, who had suffered from arthritis for 15 years, was struck by lightning. This arthritis was pretty severe. It was so bad that she couldn't even raise her arms and was unable to walk. She was basically wheelchair bound. And she was struck by lightning, and it caused a complete reversal of her condition. As Adeline says in her own words, "It flashed before my face, and I fell back stunned. Then I began to shake all over. I felt strength surging into my arms and legs ever since. It was a miracle sent from heaven." So following this lightning strike, she returned to normal health and was able to take walks around the neighborhood. And this was very well verified. There are many, many cases, some quite recent. In June of 1980, Edwin Robinson of Falmouth, Maine, was blind and deaf and disabled due to a vehicle accident, which occurred in 1971, 9 years earlier. And in June of 1980, he was walking outside with his metal cane near his garage. At this time, he was 62 years old, and suddenly he was struck by lightning. And following this lightning strike, his hearing and his vision were restored, and his partial paralysis went away. And not only that, he started to grow hair on his bald spot. This is a very well-verified case. It got quite a bit of publicity. He's done a lot of interviews about this. So yeah, he was cured not only of blindness, deafness, and paralysis, but of baldness as well. One of the most amazing cases appeared on a segment of Unsolved Mysteries, and it involves a lady by the name of Mary Clamser of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. At age 19, Mary Clamser was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and she suffered from the disease for more than 20 years. It was gradually getting worse and more severe, and at some point she reached a point where her legs were completely numb and she could no longer walk unassisted. That all changed on August 14, 1994. Mary Clamser was inside her home when she was struck by lightning. It caused burns and other harmful side effects, but she instantly began a miraculous recovery from her multiple sclerosis. Feeling came back into her legs, and less than 1 month later, she began walking again. As she says, "I knew something had changed. I was so overwhelmed that I started to cry." So many cases. I mean, here's another one which occurred in 2001. I'll just let the witness describe what happened to them in their own words. As the witness says, "I was struck on April 20th, 2001. I have dealt with severe eczema on my hands for several years, but since the lightning strike, my hands healed up almost completely." Another very recent case occurred in 2007 to a gentleman by the name of Sam Woodruff of Oklahoma City. He was struck by lightning, and at the time he had just given up radiation treatments for lung cancer and was in a steady decline. He was not expected to survive, but after being struck by lightning, his appetite started to come back, he started gaining weight, and further tests, medical tests, revealed that his lung cancer had mysteriously disappeared. He absolutely attributes this to the lightning strike. He did a whole interview on YouTube about this. It's a really amazing case, and one of several in which people have been cured of what appears to be chronic cancer as a result of a lightning strike. Here's another case, July of 2009. Donald Marsolet of Cornwall, England, was struck by lightning while taking shelter from a storm under a tree. And at the time, he had suffered from partial paralysis due to a stroke 3 years earlier. But following the lightning strike, his paralysis cleared up. He was back to normal health. Another modern case, August 17, 2009. A woman from Serbia suffered from arrhythmia, an abnormal beating of her heart. And she was struck by lightning and was lucky to survive, because many people who are struck by lightning do not survive or suffer from very severe health problems. But in these rare cases, it sometimes heals people. And she survived, and not only did she survive, she was cured of arrhythmia. Her long-standing heart condition was completely gone. So these are only a few of the many documented cases of people who have been struck by lightning and healed. Just one final case for you, the most recent I could find, occurred in July of 2017 to a 16-year-old girl by the name of Faith Mobley. And she was actually at work. She was doing dishes at the McDonald's drive-thru in Haleyville, Alabama, when lightning struck her. It hit the restaurant, traveled through the pipes to where she was doing the dishes, and went right through the drive-thru headset that she was wearing and exited through her left foot, creating a large hole in her shoe. She was knocked unconscious, but was saved by a coworker who called 911. And Faith later gave an interview and said that when she was struck, she felt her whole body tighten up. Then she became completely numb and lost consciousness. The only injury was a burn on her foot where the lightning had left her body. At the time, she suffered from poor eyesight, but miraculously, following this lightning strike, her eyesight was improved. Before, she had worn glasses, but she did not need them any longer. She had normal vision. And here's another really weird effect. It actually changed the color of her eyes. Before the lightning strike, Faith's eyes were dark green. She says, following this lightning strike, her eyes became much lighter in color and are now light green. Her doctor, Dr. James Wong, says, and I quote, "This is the first time I've ever seen or heard of this, but it's a great thing that it happened, and we're very happy for her." So yeah, there you go. There's more than 30 cases of people healed as a result of being struck by lightning. I would reiterate that this is probably not something you should seek out. Lightning is very, very dangerous. But in these rare cases, people have been healed. And this does have a very strong connection to cases in which people were healed as a result of a UFO encounter. Most of the cases of people who were healed as a result of a UFO encounter were healed using lights, beams of light. Perhaps they were struck by a beam of light from a UFO, or sometimes it's a handheld instrument being held by the ETs themselves, who use it to heal a person of a wide variety of conditions. I should note that these beams of light coming from UFOs have many remarkable properties that are similar to lightning. In some cases, people have been burned. In other cases, they have been levitated. Lightning is also known to do this. It will lift a person right off the ground and levitate you. It will sometimes burn you, and it will sometimes heal you. I covered more than 300 cases of people healed as a result of a UFO encounter in my book, The Healing Power of UFOs. And I also included a section about these lightning strike cases because of the remarkable similarities. And I think we have something to learn from cases like these. It shows that use of the electromagnetic spectrum, use of electricity and light, has a profound effect on healing, and that there should be more research done into this. Thankfully, doctors have started to recognize the healing power of light. They are using it to cure jaundice in babies. Electrical stimulation is being used to speed up the healing of wounds. Also, doctors are using electrical stimulation of muscle tissue to not only reduce pain or prevent atrophy, but actually to stimulate muscle growth. And more research is being done into the uses of light and light beams in terms of healing. And in fact, there's a really interesting study going on right now at Tel Aviv University, which is showing that lightning and electromagnetic fields given off by lightning actually might protect living cells from certain kinds of damage. This is being studied by Professor Colin Price, and I'd just like to quote what he's saying about this. At any given time, 2,000 thunderstorms are raging across the surface of our planet, and it's the energy from these lightning strikes that resonate through a cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. This is known as the Schumann resonances, and they produce extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields. And this is what Dr. Colin Price is studying, Professor Colin Price. And I'll just quote Colin Price, in his own words, as he says, "We found that under controlled conditions, the Schumann resonance fields certainly had an effect on living tissues. The most important effect was that the atmospheric ELF fields, extremely low frequency fields, actually protected cells under stress conditions. In other words, when biological cells are under stress due to lack of oxygen, for example, the atmospheric fields from lightning appear to protect them from damage. This may be related to the evolutionary role these fields have played on living organisms." It is the first study that demonstrates a link between global lightning activity and the Schumann resonances and the activity of living cells. It may explain why all living organisms have electrical activity in the same ELF spectral range, and it is the first time such a connection has been shown. This may have some therapeutic implications down the line, since these ELF fields appear to protect cells from damage, but this requires further research. So yeah, amazing. People are being healed as a result of lightning strikes. And as we've seen, it's cured people of a wide variety of conditions: paralysis, blindness, deafness, asthma, rheumatism, cancer, several cancer cases, and even curing animals, and in one case, seeming to bring a pig back to life. So this just goes to show how little we understand the electromagnetic spectrum, and I think it definitely should encourage people to look more into the possible uses of electricity for healing purposes. And that's why I wanted to do this video today, because I think it shows what amazing potential that the electromagnetic spectrum holds for healing. So that's it for today. Thanks once again for listening and watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. Keep asking questions, keep searching for answers, and most importantly, keep having fun.